Hi, my name's Phil. I like discussing politics, and the winner of the poll for today was, well, why the DUP are apparently trying to push for a no-deal Brexit. So first of all, just a quick recap of Northern Ireland politics. The parties, or the major parties in Northern Ireland at any rate, are all sectarian parties. You have some parties which campaigned for the unification of Ireland as a republic. You've got some that campaign to keep Northern Ireland within the Union. That is not the European Union, the Union of the United Kingdom. This goes back to when the Republic of Ireland was first formed. So Ireland as a whole had voted to break away from the United Kingdom and form its own republic. However, there were a lot of people who were desperate to remain British, and, well, let's put it this way, they weren't shy about making that point clear. Now, as a lot of these people tended to live in the northeast, it was decided, rightly or wrongly, to partition so that Northern Ireland remained within the UK and the rest of Ireland, the bulk of Ireland, formed its own republic. And as I say, these parties then spread up. So you had some of these parties, by the way, of course, the Republican parties also exist within the Republic of Ireland. But the Northern Ireland wings of them, you've got some that campaign for Northern Ireland to join the rest of Ireland within the Republic, and you've got others that are on the other side. And of course, there is a majority of people that are in favour of remaining British, certainly as things stand at the moment. People keeps talking about Brexit potentially changing that. Nothing like that's going to change anytime soon. It's not to say that it wouldn't in the future, and that may be relevant as well. Now, the main Unionist Party, when I say Unionist Party, I refer to people who wish to remain within the United Kingdom, was for quite a long time, was the Ulster Unionist Party. But then in the 1970s, a chap called Reverend Ian Paisley decided that they were too liberal, and he wanted to form his own hardline Unionist Party. Now, don't let the Reverend fool you. This was not a man of peace. He may have been considered himself a man of God, but he was not a man of peace. When this man spoke, fire and brimstone came out of his mouth. He formed the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP. Now, to begin with, of course, these were a smaller Unionist Party. Over time, it's grown larger, to the point where with the peace process, they actually did something which was quite remarkable. They formed working relationships with Republican parties, in particular Sinn Féin, whom Ian Paisley beforehand would always refer to as Sinn Féin IRA, to never allow the association with terrorism, slip under there. Not that he always condemned terrorism in all forms over there either. But nonetheless, the fact that they sort of took part in some power sharing allowed them to gain some more credibility, to the point where now, although they are only 10 MPs out of the whole parliament of 650, in reality, you don't actually have 650 voting, and they have a disproportionate amount of influence because of their deal with the Conservative Party. They are the major party within Westminster in Northern Ireland. And in fact, they also were within the Assembly Stormont, but more about that later. So in terms of their politics, they are ultra right-wing Conservative. They are the most right-wing party in Westminster. Try and picture this. Let's imagine you had the most extreme right wing of the Tory party. We're all talking about, are the Tory party going to split? Who knows? But let's say the extreme right wing of the Tory party split and formed its own party. That would be a tamer version of the DUP. Okay, that's where their politics are. So very similar to a lot of right wing conservative politicians throughout the UK. They tend to be fairly Eurosceptic. They're not big fans of the EU. So when the Brexit referendum came around, they campaigned to leave. Now, Northern Ireland as a whole voted to remain. There was more people voting to remain than to leave. So it was sort of out of kilter with that a little bit. But they did accept, I mean, they weren't as full-blooded as some. You know, they weren't full-on vote leave. They did acknowledge that many of their supporters would, of course, vote to remain. And this is the thing to understand about these sort of parties as well. It's the same as a nationalist party. These parties exist for one primary purpose, unlike Labour and Conservative, things like that, which have a domestic agenda. These parties stand for nationalism effectively. So a unionist party, first and foremost, is a party that is campaigning to remain within the United Kingdom. A Republican Party is campaigning first and foremost to remove it from the United Kingdom and join with the Republic. So their domestic policies can sometimes be a little bit muddled because primarily people don't vote for them for their domestic policies. They vote for them for, well, are you a unionist or Republican? And if you are, which one is most likely to win the election and therefore represent my views? And that being the overriding view. Domestic policy in this sectarian divide, especially when people are brought up with this as well, you've got several generations now, it takes a bit of a back seat. In fact, I think they only really shored up their domestic policies when they had to, when they formed their own assembly, Stormont, where all of a sudden they had to take charge of domestic affairs. So, you know, and the politics of that party, you know, very right wing, very conservative. So the thing is, being an Irish party, of course, they couldn't possibly be ignorant of the issues of the border. A lot of people in the UK, were completely ignorant about how the Irish border would affect this. They can't have been. They are very acutely aware of what happens if you try and put a hard border there. So you'd think to yourself, so why did they campaign to leave? And I think the reason is that they bought into the lies. I mean, this is sort of going into unicorn politics. I don't actually know what their stated reasons were for campaigning leave. But if they bought into the sort of unicorn politics of we can have free trade deals with the EU but not have to follow any EU laws, that was where it came down to. And of course, we now know that that's a load of nonsense. And then you think to yourself, so these MPs, and these must be acutely aware of the situation in Ireland, how could they actually come to this view? I think the way I would describe it is, imagine this way. So ministers at Westminster, your ministers have a team, the senior ministers at any rate, the members of the cabinet, have a team of civil servants explaining the legal and constitutional situation with what they're talking about. So it's not just that they have access to legal advice, it's there, it's foisted upon them. So when a minister says something that's blatantly untrue, they're just lying. But for a lot of other MPs, and you need no qualifications to be an MP, for a lot of other MPs, they can seek out that legal advice. It's not difficult for them to get reliable legal, constitutional, economic advice. But if they don't seek it out, it's not given to them in a big red box. So, you know, it is possible for them to remain ignorant of certain realities. And as I say, they may have just thought to themselves, well, you know, we'll be fine. They didn't see a danger with the border. Why would there be? And they just saw it as not having to follow these rules. It's not really worked out. But then you still think to yourselves, but why? Because they were so, like, Northern Ireland as a whole voted to remain. They tend to be more pro-EU than some other regions of the UK, in particular, of course, Wales and England. So why did they do this? And maybe their unionism gives us a bit of a lead. Now, as we've been able to see of late, they are gung-ho against, absolutely against, the nature of the backstop. So what the backstop did is it would have, if the backstop had been triggered, and no one seriously believes that there is an alternative solution as yet, okay? For all people's talk about it, I did a video yesterday, there aren't any. They know the backstop is going to come into effect. So does everyone who pays attention. In that situation, after the transitionary period is over, we've left the EU. You have a situation where Northern Ireland are still aligned with the rules for the EU in order to carry on that trade and to keep that border open. But the rest of the United Kingdom wouldn't be bound by those rules if we don't form a customs union. Now, I still believe we would form a customs union in that time, but you can't be certain. That's the thing about the backstop. You can't be certain. So in that situation, Northern Ireland would be following different rules, potentially, to the United Kingdom. Of course, they wouldn't change overnight. The United Kingdom, well, the Parliament at Westminster would change them over time, you would think. And you'd probably think they wouldn't change that many anyway, but they would change some. But it would be different rules. Now, that creates a difference between the way things are done in Great Britain, the bulk of the UK, Wales, England and Scotland, and how things are done in Northern Ireland. But it keeps the way things are done in Northern Ireland the same as in the Republic of Ireland. That's not good, as they noted. I mean, it's fairly obvious anyway. That puts a strain on the union because after a while of this, if no solution's found, you think to yourself, hang on a minute, it makes now more sense for Ireland to unify. Well, because you're following the same rules anyway, why wouldn't you? And you're following different rules to the rest of UK. You're a bit out of the way, aren't you now? They don't want that. They very desperately, aggressively will fight against that, as indeed they have. Not only did they vote Theresa May's deal down that included that backstop, but then so did a lot of her own MPs. They specifically, remember, they've got a deal with the Conservatives of what's called supplying confidence. That means they will back her in budgets and they will back her in votes of no confidence. So they did back her in the confidence vote. But a budget last year, they abstained from. Now, the budget went through anyway, and they knew it would go through. They were just making a point. Now, technically, they were supposed to support that budget. They were technically reneging on their deal. But it was their way of saying nothing is more important than the union. That's what they said. Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, who's not at Westminster, she has her seat in Stormont, except that seat's gathering dust now, said, oh, the union is our guiding star. It's all about that. But maybe, and it'd be worse than that as well. Actually, there would be something even worse about the fact that they'd be diverging from the rest of the UK. Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, as a full EU member, would be having its say voting on EU laws. Now, Northern Ireland would have to follow those EU laws, but get no say whatsoever in them. In fact, they may be having to follow laws that the Republic of Ireland has actually proposed. So it's almost like having to follow Republic of Ireland laws as a result of that. That would be, for the DUP, the ultimate outrage. So it's even worse than divergence from the UK. It's the fact that they're having to effectively do what the Republic say, because the Republic's an EU member. They won't be having that. But it may be that they saw within Brexit an opportunity to do the reverse. So if this unicorn, outcome had ever arisen, where we cut all ties with the EU, but magically still trade with them on the same terms as now, keep the border open, everything's fine and dandy somehow, then they could imagine this. Right, so now what's going to happen is the UK Parliament is bound to change some laws. We're going to have some divergence between the UK and the EU. And in Ireland, that means divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And again, thinking long term, they may be thinking to themselves, so a few years down the line, another generation down the line, the way things are done in Northern Ireland could be very, very different to the way things are done in the Republic of Ireland, which creates a divergence which they would probably think to themselves, so that makes reunification much less likely, because it would be very different systems. So I would think it's very likely that's why they campaigned for Brexit. Now, the situation, of course, as we can see now, is everyone can see that there is not going to be a deal, because we're not wanting... At the moment, I still believe we will end up with a customs union no matter what. But at the moment, Theresa May is scared shitless of trying to even suggest that, because the ERG will kibosh her. So at the moment, we're not going to get a deal because they're trying to remove the backstop. The DUP won't vote for the backstop. And I don't actually know what they would think to the customs union, other than the fact, this is also important, the customs union is something that's been pushed quite heavily by, well, I say heavily, it's supposed to be by Jeremy Corbyn. He certainly wants one. They hate his guts. Oh, they hate, and it's not just because they're a conservative party and he's, a socialist. It goes beyond that. They particularly hate his guts because he's been quite friendly with Sinn Féin and the idea of Irish reunification. He is the devil as far as they're concerned. They would not work with him under any circumstances. So anything he wants, it's quite easy for them to say that is not what we want. So they may actually be opposed to even to a customs union, but they're certainly opposed to anything that makes the rules different in Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK. And as we've seen, they will categorically vote against that, which means any deal that comes back, of course, we know the EU are not going to accept anything that doesn't keep that border open. So the backstop remains unless someone comes up with a solution. That solution could be a customs union, but unless that comes back, but it's not just the DUP that will vote against it, the ERG will as well. So it's sunk. So Arlene Foster, and in fact the DUP in general, are basically caught between a rock and a hard place. I don't know that they necessarily think it's still a bad thing, but they are caught between supporting votes that lead us towards no deal, or opposing votes that lead us towards no deal, whichever way you look at it, or for a second referendum. Now, they won't, I'm sure, put their weight behind campaigning for a second referendum. I'm pretty sure they'd vote against that for a couple of reasons. First of all, they campaigned for Brexit. Now, in most walks of life, if you come across new information and you modify your opinion, that's seen as a strength, okay? It means you're not like, your mind isn't full of concrete, you're not blinkered, you can actually see the bigger picture. Oh, new information, I didn't know that. Oh, that changes my view. In politics, it's a considerable weakness. You are never, ever supposed to change your mind, no matter how wrong you are. No matter how wrong you've even been proved, you're supposed to stubbornly stick to whatever it was you first said without all the new information. So, they can't campaign for a referendum because that's like them saying, we got it wrong, we probably shouldn't have campaigned for Brexit in the first place. So the New Deal, is where it is. But you'd think, well, the New Deal would be really bad if it's going to end up with a hard border there. And this is where I think, again, maybe they believe that the hard border will never exist, as some people do. Being Irish, they are very acutely aware of what would happen were anyone to try and erect a hard border. It would be chaos, all right? Extreme violence would be meted out on anyone that tried to do that. And just because a number of people have renounced violence, that doesn't mean to say there aren't very violent people that are absolutely ready to go. And I will bet you they're already getting ready. I bet you they're already getting ready. Certainly the Chief Constable of the Northern Irish Police thinks that. So they're probably thinking to themselves, these people from outside Ireland, they don't really get it. No one's going to dare put up a hard border. But here's where the problem is. The reason why, there's several reasons, because people keep, and I might offer this up as a topic for tomorrow potentially, because people keep saying, oh, actually, when you look at the Good Friday Agreement, it doesn't really mention borders. It doesn't say we have to have a hard border if we change state, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to. There are things in the Good Friday Agreement you cannot do without, with a hard border. A hard border is a massive deal. But it doesn't matter about that. Here's the thing. Why do we need a hard border? Is it because the EU wants one? No, it doesn't. Is it because UK wants one? Actually, yes, it does. Someone was trying to say in comments today, the UK doesn't want a hard border. This is only the EU. No, it's actually the UK that wants the hard border. If we didn't want a hard border, easy, enter a customs union. That's how you end up with no borders, effectively, or at least, managed borders. The ERG specifically, as well as UKIP and all those nutters, want hard borders. That's what they campaign for now. They didn't before the referendum. They do now. So is the UK, it's that disproportionate minority with a disproportionate amount of power that are pushing for the hard border. It's absolutely the UK that wants this. But anyway, here's where the situation arises. Let's say we don't have checks across the border after crashing out with no deal, which will, I think, be the case. I don't think the hard border's not going to go up on the first day. Neither the EU nor the UK are going to want to rush into this. So they'll try and leave it alone as it is. But here's the thing then. So then you'll have a situation where goods are passing from the EU to the UK and vice versa without checks. Now, other countries are not going to be happy about that, because then it's like, hang on a minute, you haven't got a formal agreement with each other. You're passing goods without checks. Our goods don't get through without checks. What's going on? And they'll make a complaint, because that's against WTO rules. You're treating other nations unfairly. And they will make a real complaint. Now, with a few smaller nations, you might just be able to weather the storm. But the United States will definitely kick up a fuss. Absolutely. And they know how to get their own way with things like this. They absolutely know how to get their own way. And this is what maybe being in Ireland maybe doesn't allow you to see this, because you're so focused on the terrible consequences of trying to put up a hard border that they forget that there are greater powers out there that do not give a shit about that. They care about the competitiveness of their exports. They do not give a crap about what might happen They won't even bother to think about what might happen if they put up a hard border. Because you're right, if you're not really paying attention to the people who are living in Ireland and you're not living in Ireland yourself in that region, you won't really fully appreciate it. Well, America won't fully really appreciate it. China won't really fully appreciate it. But they will come in all guns blazing to make sure that we put that hard border up, and they will get their way. Otherwise, we will suffer as if we're not going to suffer enough with a no deal, even more, and so will Ireland. So, and that's but I can well imagine that in their heads they're still thinking, well, we just won't put the border up. Theresa May will never put the border up, and and if the Republic of Ireland do it, then they'll be the bad guys. That doesn't hurt us either. And I'm sure that's what they're thinking. So that's why I'm sure that they don't really mind no deal. And although they're not campaigning specifically for it as such, I don't think they really mind it, because I don't think they fully appreciate the consequences, because they're just focused on the consequences of putting a border up and not on not putting a border up. So anyway, that's my little analysis of why the DUP are acting as they are and why they very much acted against the general population of Northern Ireland during the campaign itself. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click a like, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification, because then you get notified of further content and the polls that I put up so you can vote on future topics. Until next time, I'll see you later.